Hello dear friends, you are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and here is another daily briefing on combat operations on the Ukrainian front. The new year is gradually approaching, yet unfortunately, peace is not getting any closer. It is interesting to consider how you plan to spend the upcoming holidays. Meanwhile, hostilities continue, and as always, we carefully analyze the current situation along the front line. Over the past 24 hours, positive developments have been recorded on the front. This includes not only territorial advances, but also the capture of populated areas. In fact, 2 settlements came under Russian control over the course of the last day. We begin with the areas of responsibility of the Vostok group, specifically in Dnipro oblast. Here, Russian units achieved fairly significant progress. The maximum depth of advance reached nearly 6 kilometers, while the total area brought under control exceeded 15 square kilometers. This represents a noticeable and meaningful advance. However, it is not only the territory itself that matters, but also the fact that a populated area was taken under control. The village of Andriivka. Why is this event significant? First, the village itself cannot be described as small, especially compared to the surrounding settlements. To understand the scale, it can be compared with previously captured Ostapovske, Herasimivka, or Pishane. The difference is quite evident. Before the outbreak of hostilities, Andriivka had a population of around 800 people. Second, the location of the village is important. After its capture, the distance from current positions to Pokrovska has been reduced to 4.5 kilometers. This is a relatively short distance. Yes, there is a natural obstacle in the form of the Vovcha River, but fighters of the Vostok group have crossed it multiple times before and possess the necessary experience. How important is the settlement of Pokrovske? Its importance can be described as extremely high. Roads from Pokrovska lead north toward Vasilkivka and further to Pavlohrad, and west toward the city of Novomykolaiv in Zaporizhzhia oblast. Novomykolaiv is one of only 4 cities that remain under Ukrainian control in Zaporizhzhia oblast. Thus, reaching Pokrovsky would give Russian units a certain degree of freedom in choosing further directions of action, while the Ukrainian command would be forced to distribute its forces across several axes at once. Third, Andriivka has become the 32nd settlement to come under Russian control in Dnipropetrovsk oblast. As for further prospects, in the near term the main focus will likely not be on Pokrovsky itself, but on consolidating positions on the western bank of the Haichur River. First of all, this involves pressure on the settlement of Bratske, followed by access to railway lines and further movement south toward Ternivate. Ternivate is an important urban-type settlement located on elevated terrain. Control over it could create conditions for further development of an offensive westward. In addition, information emerged this morning that Russian units have taken the settlement of Zarichne. This is another settlement on the western bank of the Haichur River. As a result, Ukrainian defenses in this sector are experiencing serious pressure. The Vostok group also released objective control footage from the fighting in this settlement, allowing one to state with confidence that Zarichne is under Russian army control. At the same time, fighting continues in Huliaipole. Reports from this direction are generally positive. Ukrainian units are unable to stabilize the situation in the city and are being forced to withdraw. According to sources that can be considered reliable, a significant portion of Huliaipole is already under Russian control. There are also reports of reaching the Huliaipole road. These changes have not yet been reflected on maps, but this will likely happen in the near future. Overall, it can already be said that approximately 70% of the city's territory is under control. Accordingly, there are realistic chances of completing combat operations in Huliaipole by the end of the year, although it is not yet possible to guarantee this with absolute certainty. It should also be noted that the Ukrainian side has redeployed part of its elite units to this sector, including Azov formations, the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, as well as a number of other regiments and battalions. However, their task appears to be not so much an attempt to retake the city, but rather to contain further Russian advances west of Huliaipole. How effective this strategy will be remains to be seen, but it is unlikely that the advance can be completely stopped. It should also be taken into account that in Zaporizhzhia oblast, the Ukrainian side has constructed a new and fairly powerful defensive line. It runs approximately 7 kilometers from current Russian positions along the Verkhnya Terza-Rojdestvenska line and further north. As a result, after overcoming the Haichur defensive line, Russian units encounter defensive positions on elevated terrain, railway infrastructure, and then another defensive line that at first glance appears quite serious. Therefore, claims that there are no fortified defensive lines beyond the Haichur line do not correspond to reality. Next, we move on to the Pokrovska and Myrnohrad directions. No significant changes were recorded here over the past day. In Myrnohrad, there were earlier statements claiming that the city had fully come under Russian control, but clearance operations are still ongoing. Overall, it can be said that the city is effectively under Russian control, as the Ukrainian side lacks the capability to retake it. At the same time, isolated pockets of resistance remain within the city, and combat operations inside the settlement continue. Regarding Kostyantynivka, in the previous briefing, I spoke about an attack in the area of Stepanivka. Additional data received confirmed that it was not possible to establish a foothold directly in the village. Nevertheless, attempts are likely to continue, as control over this sector is important for a potential assault on the city and for blocking Ukrainian positions in Kostyantynivka from the western direction. There are also reports of a possible entry of Russian units into the eastern part of Kostyantynivka. So far, this information has not been confirmed by all sources, and we are awaiting objective control data. The Sumy direction. Increased activity of Russian units has been recorded north of Sumy. Elements of the Seva group are intensifying operations, which is linked to the redeployment of Ukrainian reserves to other, more strained sections of the front. According to Yuri Podolyarka, this weakening of Ukrainian forces in the region has naturally led to tangible results. Russian units managed to regain control over a significant portion of positions lost during the summer in the area of Oleksiivka, and also occupied new positions south of Yunakivka. Combined with advances in the Krasnopilia district, this could create conditions for a subsequent blockade of Sumy using unmanned systems capable of complicating supply routes to the city from multiple directions. To prevent such a scenario, the Ukrainian command will have to search for additional reserves, which represents a serious challenge given the overall situation along the front. In the Kupiansk direction, there were no changes over the past day. Urban fighting continues. The rapid success the Ukrainian side had hoped for was not achieved. Nearly 3 weeks have passed since the start of counter-offensive actions, and about a week and a half since public statements were made, yet roughly half of the city remains under Russian control. The main issue continues to be logistics between the left and right banks, which remains difficult and unstable. Until this problem is resolved, the Kupiansk sector will remain highly tense. Finally, northern Kharkiv oblast. Here, Russian units have achieved success. Fighters of the Seva group have taken control of the settlement of Prilipka. This is another settlement lost by the Ukrainian side as a result of redeploying forces to the Kupiansk direction. As a result, while holding Kupiansk, the Ukrainian armed forces have already lost 6 settlements in northern Kharkiv Oblast, including Vovchansk. Looking ahead, clearance of the forested area and a possible advance toward the village of Hravsky are expected. At the same time, to ensure stable control, operations would also be required in the forest belt between the Siversky Donets River and Staritsia. So far, no active movement has been recorded in this sector, but the situation may change. Summing up the past 24 hours, 2 settlements and 16.5 square kilometers of territory have come under Russian control. The Ukrainian side recorded no significant advances over the same period. That concludes today's overview of the situation on the front. Next, we move on to a review of political developments. The European Union has, in essence, failed to meet Ukraine's expectations. This is reported by Politico, which notes that plans to create a so-called reparations loan have effectively collapsed. The idea involved using frozen Russian assets worth approximately $210 billion to provide direct, long-term financing for Ukraine. Such a mechanism could have secured financial resources for Kiev for many years, but EU member states were ultimately unable to reach an agreement on this issue. Instead, a more limited aid package of $90 billion was approved, backed by guarantees from the EU's overall budget. According to a Politico analyst, this amount is clearly insufficient, given that Ukraine's financial needs are estimated at around $160 billion. The failure of this ambitious plan, caused by disagreements among key EU countries such as Germany, France, and Italy, as well as legal concerns raised by Belgium, has clearly demonstrated the internal weakness and fragmentation of the European Union. As a result, Kyiv is losing a guaranteed source of long-term funding, while Moscow, according to the publication, is effectively being sent a signal that time is beginning to work in its favor. Additional pressure comes from growing fatigue among European voters over the conflict, as well as the stance of Donald Trump's administration. Taken together, these factors make a scenario in which the war ends on Russia's terms next year increasingly likely. Against this backdrop, new signs of policy shifts are also emerging among individual European states. In particular, the new Czech Minister of Defense, Jaromír Zuna, has declined a planned visit to Ukraine and announced the termination of a program to purchase ammunition for the Ukrainian armed forces using state budget funds. This was reported by the Speaker of the Czech Parliament, Tomio Okamura. This decision marks a sharp turn in Prague's policy. Previously, the Czech Republic was considered one of the key initiators and coordinators of artillery shell supplies to Ukraine, but this activity is now officially being phased out at the state level. Thus, another Western ally of Kyiv is demonstrating a departure from a policy of unconditional military support. This step reflects growing pragmatism and fatigue in European capitals, leading to a reduction in the resources available to Ukraine for continuing the conflict and fitting into a broader trend of gradually scaling back assistance. Additional economic consequences are also being observed in connection with developments in the Black Sea. According to the Telegram channel Zarichne, citing its sources, strikes by Ukraine's security service against Russian commercial vessels have already had negative repercussions for Ukrainian ports. In response, economic facilities in the ports of Yuzhny, Chornomorsk, Ilychivsk, and Odessa have been destroyed or seriously damaged. According to the source, strikes against this infrastructure may continue. The damage to the state budget is estimated at tens of millions of dollars, while business losses are several times higher. Insurance costs for ships traveling to Ukrainian ports have risen significantly, and many shipping companies are already refusing to enter them. For now, only the ports of Izmail and Reni remain exceptions, as no such incidents have been recorded there, but even in these cases, serious logistical difficulties persist. Against this backdrop, price growth in Ukraine has accelerated. All of this is taking place under conditions where, according to existing forecasts, Ukrainians may face a sharp increase in utility tariffs in the spring of 2026, up to 100%. In addition, lawmakers are considering further increases in the tax burden. Taken together, these factors are seriously complicating the country's socio-economic situation. Zarichne concludes. Meanwhile, Responsible Statecraft writes about the United States' approach to a potential settlement of the conflict. According to the publication, Washington hopes that security guarantees could persuade Ukraine to make concessions. The U.S. administration, as noted, is promoting a territory in exchange for security formula, offering Kyiv the relinquishment of Donbass in return for certain, but highly ambiguous guarantees. The authors of the article emphasize that such a plan fails to take into account Russia's key red lines, as well as the political realities within Ukraine itself, where such concessions are considered unacceptable. At the same time, Russia has repeatedly stated its readiness for negotiations based on recognition of the realities that have emerged on the ground. In Washington, for its part, there is a belief that promises of future security guarantees could push Kyiv toward territorial concessions. The White House believes it has found a workable formula for resolving the conflict based on this principle, the publication notes. However, the rigid position of the Kyiv leadership, which refuses negotiations and compromises according to the authors, is blocking the path to a peaceful settlement. Instead of a sober assessment of the situation and the development of a strategy aimed at protecting long-term national interests, Ukrainian authorities, as stated in the article, continue to sacrifice territory and the lives of their citizens, relying on Western promises that have repeatedly proven unreliable, most notably in the case of the Budapest Memorandum. It is also noted that the proposed security guarantees would be even less reliable than the options currently under discussion. but they might appear more convincing because they align with the type of assistance the United States and Europe have already provided to Ukraine over the past 4 years. At the same time, it is emphasized that even such support would remain limited in nature. Ultimately, according to the Western publication, Washington, guided by its own geopolitical interests, is offering Kyiv conditions that are inherently difficult to implement in practice, while Russia is demonstrating a readiness for dialogue. The main obstacle to peace, in the author's view, remains the position of the Ukrainian leadership, which continues to cling to illusions at the expense of the country's future.